All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Innovate BC Wednesday. It is the last Wednesday of June. Next week is a new month. Summer is officially here. And I hope wherever you are in Turtle Island that you are well, that you are healthy, that you are safe. So thank you for joining us. We're honored that you are here. I always feel it's important to give thanks to Creator. We have this beautiful virtual community here on Wednesdays, and we have amazing, remarkable speakers. So we're just honored that we have this time where we can learn, we can grow, we can build on our capacity. So that's what this is all about. So we give thanks to Creator for this day, the gift of this moment that we can learn. Our guest speakers joining us from Toronto so that we can learn whatever he's bringing to the table today, that knowledge could be shared across the provinces. So that's amazing. So we give you thanks for Creator for this moment. We think of the lands, we think of creation and Mother Earth and all of the gifts that she gives us. We have the sacred waters, we have the skies, we have the beautiful land, grass is green, the birds, the animals are out. So we're surrounded by all our relations. So we give thanks for the gift of this day and all of the gifts that the Creator has given to us. So hi, Creator. And thank you all for joining. So today's topic is Procurement 101, bid readiness. To me, this really calls to capacity building. I think it's really important to expand our knowledge, to learn, to help us to do our jobs a little bit better. So we welcome to our webinar Eitan. Thank you so much. He's joining us from Toronto. He's a seasoned senior executive. He brings nearly 30 years Canada-wide and international cross-sector experience. He has served in an interim senior finance capacity for 11 organizations. That is remarkable. In projects ranging from startup to restructuring, and has an extensive background in procurement and strategic sourcing with a focus on the resource sector as well as the not-for-profit sector. He is also a principal with land and people planning, an organization focused on ESG and community wellness and development across Canada. That's, again, remarkable. That's the only word that's coming out of my mouth when I'm reading and looking at your bio. He has an extensive governance background, having served on various community, industry, and government boards and tribunals, and as well as volunteering on various capacity building initiatives. He is a graduate of Queen's University with a master's degree in business administration, holds the CPA CMA designations, and is a graduate of the Director's Education Program of the Institute of Corporate Directors. So let's give a round of applause for our guest speaker. We are delighted that you're here. You're joining us from Toronto, so a different time zone than myself here in Alberta. So thank you for making space to lend your knowledge to our webinar this afternoon. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction and thanks for joining everybody. So I just would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous people of all the lands that we're on today. And we do meet on a virtual platform, but we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the lands which we each call home. So, and again, we do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of all the local different Indigenous cultures and peoples. So what we're going to talk about is receiving, assessing, and deciding on bids, preparing and submitting, and then following up on bids, and also just getting prepared and making sure that you're able to do all the background work so that you're ready to participate. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions, but also if anybody has any questions in the middle, feel free to just jump in. Assume I can't see you and just jump in and ask. So just a bit of background about us. Land and People Planning is a majority Inuit firm with offices in Toronto and Baker Lake, as well as an office in Africa as well. And broadly speaking, we focus on readiness initiatives and how organizations and communities can prepare themselves to participate in new regional economic opportunities. So opportunities sneak up, and you want to make sure that you're ready to go and ready to participate in them once they're there. So this is a quick overview of the process we're going to discuss this afternoon. And we start by looking at how you learn about bids and then flow through the process of preparing award and post-award, and then also understanding really the full process end to end and all the things you can do along the way to make sure that you're as ready to go when the time comes. So before that, just a little bit of level setting to talk about, generally speaking, the most common types of bid notifications that you might receive. So there's a request for proposal, which is a formal method of receiving detailed and comparable proposals from potential suppliers. And this provides to procurement required information that's needed to make informed purchasing decisions. And these usually follow a request for information and purchasers using these are often seeking for a solution based on offers to meet their needs. So this compares to a request for tender, which is a formal invitation to potential suppliers to supply clearly defined products, and it's focused on price and quality. Then there's an RFQ, which is a request for a quotation, and that's used for inviting potential suppliers to submit for specific projects or products. And this is really focused on pricing. And then there's an RFI, or request for information, where you provide more general background about your organization's capability, and they may use this to include you on a list of assorted requests. So one of the things to think about is, how do you actually find out about bids? So you may find out from community and procurement staff. You may want to register on a client platform and then look at what pre-qualifications may be available. So you'll want to build relationships with community and local staff, potential clients. And really, the way to look at pre-qualification is what are the things that you can do to shorten the response cycle and the amount of time that it takes you to go from the point at which you start to actually having a substantive bid to submit to your clients. And it allows you to also understand what your capability gaps are, and then to identify where you might want to look for partners to help close those gaps. So some of the things you need to consider for pre-qualification are listed on this slide. And really what this does is demonstrates to your clients that you have the capacity to meet their needs. And it often includes things like financial capacity, your track record, your health and safety and environmental record, technical capacity, any ethical or anti-corruption issues in some cases, quality management. It really shows your suppliers that you're meeting a base level of competence in order to be on bid lists for specific categories. So typically, pre-qualification would qualify you for specific categories, and then you would demonstrate your ability to meet those specific ones. So when you do receive a bid, what do you do from there? The first thing, as you review the document, you really should complete a detailed review of all the documents and terms of reference. And a good approach is to make a checklist so that you can verify, you can go down the list, verify your ability to meet the requirements. And it's important that you do this not only for the operational components of the request, but also for general terms as well. And at this time, it's also important to understand the evaluation criteria, which we'll touch on later as well, so that you can think about how you're going to compare with your competitors. So in general, you're going to want to review all the general instructions, terms of reference, and particularly the statement of work, which tells you what you're going to do, the mandatory requirements, and ensure that you can meet those, and then think about the evaluation criteria, as I said. So now that you have your list of requirements, what you want to do is undertake a detailed gap analysis of your organization's ability to meet those requirements. And what you really want to think about is that completing a proposal is going to take a lot of work. So before you go down that path, you want to make sure that you have a reasonable shot of success before committing all that effort. So, you might not win, but you want to make sure that you've got a reasonable shot at least at winning. So you're going to want to, as I said, review and pay attention to the mandatory requirements. If you can't meet those, there's a good chance that you won't be considered. And then you also want to think about other capacity issues that we've just touched on as well, in terms of your organizational capacity, some of your diversity and inclusion policies, and so forth. Really, it's a really honest and hard view of your organization to say, can we actually meet the bid that we're looking at, meet the requirements of what we're being asked to do. Then you get into some more specific and technical components related to the specific scope of work. And this would include an assessment of whether you can price competitively and also how you can handle project execution. So what you're going to want to look at from a commercial perspective is how you're going to manage costs, whether you're able to provide the insurance and warranties that are required, looking at pricing and those kinds of things. And then you want to think about overall how you're going to execute the project. So are you going to need subcontractors? Are you going to be able to meet local procurement requirements? And thinking about implementation in particular, how you're going to manage from a supply chain perspective, what kind of tracking and reporting you're going to provide. And I would not underestimate change management and transition. And I say that from my own experience, having worked on some large scale bids, where one of the biggest obstacles for the client was having comfort and assurance around the transition process from existing suppliers. So you're going to need to give comfort where you're taking over potentially or proposing to take over for an existing supplier, how you're going to do that, how you're going to manage that, and importantly, how it's not going to impact the organization. So it's important to consider those in your response and your capacity as well. So once you've completed your analysis of your capability, you really need to make a go, no-go decision based on whether you believe you can submit a competitive bid. So some of the factors that you may want to consider aside from your own capacity are listed here as well. So you really are also going to want to look at the competitive landscape and then to understand how prepared you're going to be to complete both the bid and to execute the work. So, do you meet the requirements? What's your current capacity to complete the actual bid itself? And then what's your current capacity to meet the contract requirements if you're successful? And then you need to think about, what are the number of competitors that are out there? Are there competitors that you're probably not going to be able to displace? What is the capacity of those competitors? And then how do you compete with them from a costing perspective? And then you think to yourself, did you know the bid was coming? Are you prepared? Because some bids may just not have a long enough response window. And if it's a pretty tight window and you don't have the capacity or the ability to respond in that time, it may be best to forego that particular opportunity. So really, as a supplier, the questions you want to ask yourself and try to be as honest with you as you can with yourself. Are you capable of offering the service or product requested? Do you meet the evaluation criteria? And again, you want to look at the mandatory criteria. If you don't meet the mandatory criteria, you may not want to look at the particular opportunity. And then are you willing to accept all the terms and conditions? Because often as part of the bid package, and we'll touch on later as well, there is a contract that's included. And by submitting a bid, you're effectively adhering to the contract terms and conditions. So you want to make sure that you're treating that appropriately as well. So if you answer no to any of those questions, then the particular opportunity may not be one that you won't necessarily want to look at. So we talked about early on that if you've looked at a bid, you should put together a checklist of all the required documents. And then as you're moving through, you want to make sure that you use that checklist to ensure that you have a checkpoint, really. So you go back and you validate that all the things that you need to include, you're including in there. So you want to break down your response so that you don't miss anything, and you want to ensure that you complete the bid in plenty of time. So when you get the document and you've decided you're going to bid, put together a template response. And then you want to make sure that your bid is completed and it's on time. and that it's submitted properly as well. So you also want to make sure that you've got a follow-up plan. And really what that means is that if you're successful, how do you execute? How do you mobilize? How do you do all those things? If you're not successful, how do you actually gain something from the experience by meeting with the procurement team, understanding where you might be able to close the gaps and strengthen any future opportunities as well. And then importantly, if you're neither successful nor unsuccessful, but rather the client is asking for additional information or wants site visits or any of those kinds of things, what do you need to do to be able to deliver on those? What process do you have to actually support any additional requests from the potential client to give more understanding of both your bid and your business's capacity? So this slide really looks at what type of scenario you have if you're pre-qualified or not pre-qualified. So as you can see from the slide, having your standard information ready or being pre-qualified in advance goes a long way to shortening your response time and to allow you to focus on the technical and pricing aspects of your bid. So if you've pre-qualified, you'll typically have a shorter process, and if not, you'll have more work ahead of you. So a lot of the things that are typically included in bids are standard and say boilerplate. They may look at policies, they may look at procedures. So how many of those do you have ready? Do you have a library of those that are ready to go and to submit in the bid? Or once you get a bid request, are you all of a sudden scrambling to compile new documents and new policies to actually include as part of your package? So you want to spend a lot of time thinking through that, making sure that you're ready in advance, because you're going to get some bids that are going to have a very short response time. And if you don't have your documentation ready, your likelihood of success is diminished pretty quickly. So as you prepare your bid, think about some of the points on this slide. You want to know when the due date and submission instructions are. Internally, you want to have a lead who's going to coordinate your response. So who's going to be the person within your organization who's going to reach out to everybody, compile everything, and really write everything from one voice. I've seen a lot of bids that 5 or 6 people may have been involved in, and they look like 5 or 6 people wrote them. So you want to have a bit of a standard approach, a single voice across the organization. You want to review all the tender documentation. A lot of these bids have multiple documents, and people often focus on just the statement of work, but quite often there's other documentation that's pretty critical in terms of defining some of the requirements, some of the criteria that the organization is going to look at. So you want to understand those. If you do have any questions, you want to really know what the deadline to ask those. Often there's a deadline to ask questions. An important thing to consider when you're asking questions is that often organizations will share the answers to those questions with all the other bidders. So you want to consider whether the question you're asking potentially divulges any competitive perspective that you may have. So you want to be careful about the schedule, the questions that you're asking. And then you want to build a schedule backwards from the submission date and make sure that you build in yourself a little bit of a buffer. So if the bid is due on July 31st, build a schedule backwards, understanding what you need to complete, understanding when you're going to get what done, and who's going to review things along the way. You want to make sure that there is an opportunity to review, and not only to review, but also that you have sufficient recovery time, because reviewing it half an hour before it's due is probably not going to serve you well. And then again, we talked about mandatory requirements. You want to be able to meet those. You want to carefully review the evaluation criteria. I've seen some bids that have very strange evaluation criteria and some very technical evaluation criteria. So particularly from government, a little bit less so from industry, but you want to evaluate those closely and understand and make sure that your bid speaks to those criteria. And often you may even want to put a table with the evaluation criteria in your response just to demonstrate that you've met the requirements. You also want to consider any experience that you've had from other bids for similar work. And then, as I said, you want to prepare a pre-submission checklist, something that allows you to validate that you have completed all the requirements and that you've got all the documents that are required, all the information that's required, any resumes and so forth as well. So also, you're going to want to make sure that you follow the response guidelines provided in the bid and address all the requirements, and that you clearly understand the evaluation criteria. And also, as I said before, make sure that you review any pro forma contracts that might be included in the bid package, because you will be expected to sign those and adhere to those. So from the response guideline, some organizations may have very specific requirements around the response. They may have a fixed number of pages. I've seen government bids that specified the font. There's any number of things that you might see. I've also seen bids rejected because they were specific around accepting digital signatures or not accepting digital signatures. You want to be real careful and watch those things, watch all the specifics, because you want to ensure that your bid's going to be evaluated on its merits and is not going to be disqualified for any technicality or anything of that sort. And and then, so from there, you want to think about the technical aspect of your bid, and you want to assess how you're going to answer the technical components. So what you need to think about from a technical scope: you want to think about mobilization, execution, closure, controls and reporting, and so forth. And then you want to think about what the strategy is for closing the technical gap between you and your competitors. So to the extent that your competitors may be offering different solutions, how can you highlight how your solution is more effective than theirs? Do you need to build partnerships? Do you need to collaborate? Think about some long-term projects versus shorter-term response. Partnerships are a little harder to develop for short responses. We've talked about change management plans. If you're not the incumbent, how do you plan on actually operationalizing the project, making sure that the transition doesn't impact the client? Because procurement people are after reducing their costs, operational people are after reducing their headaches. So you want to make sure that you address both of those. And then from project mobilization, and I would say, this is particularly important today when we've all read lots about the supply chain issues facing the world. Do you have the materials and resources in place to initiate the work? We've heard about all the staffing challenges. Are you going to be able to mobilize staff to actually start the project? And can you meet the mobilization period? Are you going to be able to cover the upfront costs associated with mobilization, and so forth? From a project execution perspective, you want to think about whether or not you have the systems in place to execute the project. Do you have the proper project management processes and people in place? Do you have the experienced staff? And if you're relying on suppliers, are you confident in their ability to meet your schedule? And make sure that you've communicated any issues to your subcontractors as well. From a project closure perspective, you want to make sure that if there is any warranty period, you're able to meet it, you're able to work with it. And then from a project control perspective, you want to think about how you're going to be able to report in a timely manner for both project controls and any other specific requirements that your client may have. So those are all key things to think about. And then again, when you think about your partners, you want to think about how you might be able to improve your offer with which partners. How are they going to help you close the gap? And is there value in some kind of collaboration from your end and your organization? So when you think about how to price your bids and think about the commercial component, this is typically a lengthy and complex discussion. It has a lot to do with understanding your own costs and also what the market will bear. So when you look at your own costs, you want to think about, have you considered all costs? Have you factored in any hidden costs? I know one organization that had a bunch of fuel at their site and assumed that fuel was free when they priced their site. So that worked really well for the first component of the bid, but then afterwards they were losing money on it. So you want to think about anything that's hidden, anything that's not included, that's not obvious, any labor costs that you may have, any overhead. You want to think about the contract length. So I was involved in one contract that was in another country where they wanted us to bid a 7-year term in foreign currency. So the foreign exchange risk was just too much. So we didn't bid just on that basis. So you need to consider whether you're going to be able to execute for the full length of the contract and and you're going to have the ability to actually draw that out. And then are you going to have your equipment? Do you actually have your equipment already, or are you going to have to buy it and specifically for the project? And if you're going to have to buy it specifically for the project, is the project long enough to actually pay off the equipment? Because you don't want to buy expensive equipment for a 6-month project and then be stuck with no work for that equipment as well. And then overall, you really want to think organizationally. Any organizational leader, their job is to determine how to best allocate company resources. So if there is an interesting project, you want to think about how that compares with the other opportunities that you have to deploy your company's resources. You want to make sure that it's helping build your company and not detracting from some things that may be more beneficial. And then you want to think about how you can be more price competitive. What's your profit requirement? Should you be buying assets? Should you be leasing assets? And what other opportunities do you have? Where do you bring in partnerships? Where do you bring in subcontractors? And then what permanent resources do you take on as well? So some of these points I've touched on earlier, but some other considerations for preparing bids. You want to ask questions if you're unclear. Again, just bear in mind that you don't want to disclose any of your bidding strategy. You want to be clear on how you're going to do the work. Really think of the person reviewing the bid as being particularly lazy, and make it as easy as possible for them to understand how you're going to meet their requirements. Don't make them work too hard in understanding, because if you're gonna ask them to work too hard in understanding, they're probably going to move to the next document. You want to clearly introduce your team, show clearly and transparently how your price works, and address each and every point. You want to make sure that you've ticked off all the requirements. You want to be complete, concise, and precise. So direct, make sure it's easy to understand. Don't forget to sign the document. I've already mentioned sometimes you need to sign by hand, sometimes you don't. Follow the timelines, any directions. Make sure that you also review any addendums. They're occasionally issued for documents, and you may need to acknowledge that you have reviewed them. Also importantly, don't give or offer gifts. There are certain companies that have very specific policies around that, particularly during the procurement process. We were doing work many years ago with Imperial Oil, and their management team, you couldn't even buy them a cup of tea. So during that process in particular, you want to make sure that you're not doing anything that may disqualify your organization. So when you've completed your bid, what you want to do is to review it against the checklist that you made at the start to make sure that nothing is missing. So check off all the documents, make sure you've signed all the components that need to be signed, any resumes, all those things. Make sure that you've included them and that you've got the full package when you submit. So a few common mistakes that you want to try to avoid where you can. Proposals may not be received either on time or in the way that is required. There are still a few government agencies that want you to fax proposals in. There are certain organizations that may have portals that you need to upload, so you want to make sure that you're following those. You want to make sure you comply with any stated mandatory requirements, and that you explain the role of your team and who's part of the process, and that you provide any past experience clearly and make sure that it's directly tied as well. And then also you want to make sure, to the extent possible, that any pricing, fees, and expenses are submitted in a format that is consistent with what the organization has asked for. So once you've submitted your bid, there may be a shortlist process. They may want an interview, so you want to think about how that's going to look. You're going to want to think about what needs to be, what you want to present during any kind of presentation. They may want a site inspection, so you may want to make sure your facility is ready for a site inspection and that you have the right people around. and there may be an opportunity to negotiate some contract terms. Then finally, there'd be a debrief potentially if you're not successful, just to understand how you can improve your process as well. So this is a sample evaluation document that shows really what a typical evaluation schedule might look like. So what's helpful is to go through something like this once you have once you've completed your bid and really score your organization. And you can also do this in advance to say, you know, how do I think my organization is going to score? So that'll give you a sense of how you're going to do compared to your competitors as well. So it's an important step to go through. So at the end here, we're just going to talk a little bit about what's the stuff that you can do in advance to make sure that your organization is ready for projects and ready to participate in bids. And really, the graph here is just to think about that the level of effort and the level of effort grows and the projects get more complex. You need to have a lot more upfront work and make sure that your organization is doing a lot more to be ready to go. So some projects might be simple. You might need to just source or procure some product. That might be fairly straightforward, but other ones are more complex and more involved. And the more involved they are, the more time you're going to need and the more infrastructure you're going to need to be able to support those types of projects. So overall, in terms of shortening your turnaround time, because that's really what you want to focus on, how do you prepare and make sure that you've got as much ready to go before a project is actually issued, before a bid is out there, so that you're ready to go when it comes out? So how much do you do from a market intelligence perspective? Do you continue to speak with the various buyers of some of your clients to meet them? Are you involved in some of the community sessions? Where you can pre-qualify, are you doing any of those pre-qualification components? Where you need any kind of insurance requirements, have you negotiated those in advance so that you're not rushing for project-specific insurance? Importantly, and there's not a lot of organizations that necessarily do this, but this is an exceptionally helpful step. If you build a response library and template so that you have all of your information in one place, you have a bid that comes out, you know where all your policies are, you know where all your resumes are, you know where any of the components that you're going to need in order to answer the bid requirements. They're in one place. That'll significantly shorten your time, eliminate a whole lot of headaches, and give you a single consistent approach to responding to bids, which is particularly helpful. You're also going to want to attend as many local roundtables, committees, all those kinds of things to participate in those. And then importantly, partnerships are particularly important for some of those larger bids that we talked about, the ones that require a bit more capacity and a bit more time. So how do you line up the right partners? How do you make sure that you're ready to go in advance? So it's all linked together. You want to build that market intelligence so you understand what opportunities are coming. When you know what opportunities are coming, you then link it back and say, well, where can I do this on my own? If I can't, where are the right partners to support me on these projects? And for some larger, longer term projects, you can actually develop a partnership that allows you to transition ownership over time. You can do a range of things. You also want to look at funding for both overall readiness and then training and capacity building. There's a lot of organizations that provide support on capacity building, whether it's through a mentorship perspective or other perspective. There's financial literacy programs for businesses. What are the things you can do in advance before bids come out to be ready? And again, we talked about the response library, but what can you have ready to go before any bid comes out that helps you have your health and safety environment policies, any of your Indigenous training policies, all those kinds of documents ready to go, along with your overall corporate documentation. And then you want to think about diversification. What are the categories that you're focused on? What are the categories where you think you need to build some more capacity? And again, link it back to partnerships and the market. What opportunities are there, and where can I diversify my risk? So the questions to really think about organizationally here are, are you routinely able to respond to a bid in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks? How long does it take you to typically respond to a bid? If it takes a long time, what can you do to shorten that window? Because that'll significantly improve the opportunities that you're able to bid on. So if you have a bid library, you've got all that documentation in advance, you've got a large scale project, you should be able to respond to it faster. If you've got a smaller project, again, if you have everything ready to go, you should be able to respond to it faster. Are you doing a lot of that upfront engagement work with your clients to understand what work might be coming before it's out? That might mean, understanding that certain types of work are going to come up in a year. If you lost a contract or didn't win a contract and you want to bid on it next time, when's the next time that it's coming due? What can you do to build and further position yourself? So a lot of it is really, you win some, you lose some, and you try to learn from the ones that you lose and understand what you can do to close the gap and further build capacity organizationally. So with that, I think that's all I've got. So maybe pause here to see if anybody has questions.
Wow, that was great. You brought a lot to the table this afternoon. Thanks so much, Eitan. Does anyone have any questions? We have plenty of time for questions or perhaps comments. We invite you to come on in or maybe even use that chat box. I feel like a person, submitting or responding to a request for a proposal really needs like an eagle eye. Like they really need to be thorough and have great understanding. So you really captured that well in your presentation. So questions, anyone?
Hi, my name is James. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, I got an email. I'm licensed, bonded, and insured. I'm not sure how I got this invitation, but I'm here. I'm licensed, bonded, and looking for work. Is this the right Zoom or?
Well, we're talking about procurement and like just really building capacity on if there's bids out there, how we respond to that. So it could be something that would be helpful for you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I got it.
Okay, thanks, James.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, here's a question from Sandra. Can you explain
I see. Yeah,
there we go. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a range of, if you're bidding with somebody, there's a range of different scenarios that you can look at. So really a lot of it is what type of legal structure are you going to set up? So if you're bidding with an organization on a project and you brought in a partner, you might look at setting up a new company where you each own a share of the company. You could look at setting up an agency type arrangement where I buy your services and I resell them at a markup, or you look at a joint venture, which is two companies submitting something jointly and responding to a bid. So they're both participating in the response. More often than not, the term joint venture, I think people have taken it to mean really effectively companies that two companies that get together and set up a new company, but from a legal perspective, that's not necessarily the case. It could just be a couple of companies partnering on a response for a specific project. So a couple of companies get together and submit a response. In either way, I would say in any of those cases, you want to make sure that the process is well documented, because partnerships and marriages, everything's great when we're friends, but when we're not, all of a sudden, there's a lot to clean up. So you want to make sure that the process is very clear and the responsibilities are very clear, and that each partner understands what their requirements are.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Sandra. Any other questions? This is a great opportunity. I think you're also going to send this so we can send it out to the participants, so you'll be able to see a copy on your end and read through it as well. So it's a really great resource.
Yeah, and if anybody has questions after this, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome. Okay, well, oh, here we go. So in the chat box again, Ken's saying comprehensive presentation, and I agree. So thank you very much. So Sandra again in the chat box. So if you can check that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends. I don't know that there's a guideline. I think it really depends by project, by client. So it's, there's no, call it hard and fast rule. I think it really depends on particular situations. So any guidance I would give on that would be wrong. I would say it just depends on the specific project.
Okay. All right, and Lauren also says excellent presentation, but no questions at the moment. All right, well, I think you've left us with much to think about. So thank you so much for lending your valuable time and bringing this great presentation to Innovate BC this afternoon. So thank you, Eitan. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, and we hope to see you next time. Take care.
Thanks for the opportunity to chat with everybody.